Continue. Is this the Sixth Symphony?
It might be, actually, yeah. We need to check with the we need with Yassine.
Is it yours, Sabrina, or is it Yassine?
No, it's Yassine's.
Okay.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
وعليكم السلام. انت رفعت الميكروفون يا ياسين زرت.
All right, I'll mute everyone.
Okay.
Can I'll leave Sabrina for now. Just
maybe leave Yassine as well, because I think he was trying to play the music until we start.
no, I don't think. Is he putting that music so that people can listen to it?
Yeah, until we start. Yes, that's what we thought.
I thought it's something he couldn't get control of.
Oh no, it's actually on purpose.
No, it shouldn't be from him. If we put it from your end, because his connection is not good, so it keeps coming and going. No. We have 15 attendees so far. Can we get him? Can we get a message to him to say that it's not a nice on the audience ears because it's not continuous.
Well, I think it's stopped now. No, I can't hear it anymore.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay. Anyway, we've got 1 minute, so hopefully.
Okay, shall we make start? We have 16 people in the audience, 17, 18. Maybe give them a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, because the last couple sort of, yeah, they're going up. So maybe we'll give them about 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes sounds good.
Late arrivals to yeah.
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that. I'll stop sharing the camera for now. It would be nice if there is a facility where there is a channel of communication just between the organizers.
Yeah, that would be a good feedback to go to webinar, or maybe there is a way in.
I have a feeling the premium one might have. I'm honest.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said I have a feeling that the premium version might have that facility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was thinking that as well.
Just put a message to the audience to say that we're going to start in a few minutes.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to do that, or are you doing that?
I'm doing it.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just to give people, I meant just to give people a chance to join.
Yeah. The numbers have not gone up, so shall we make a start? We could do, yeah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. Ramadan Kareem. My name is Hussein Burda, and I'm here to introduce and first to welcome you to this webinar on ISO 9001, the 2015 version, and particularly to introduce our two speakers to you this morning. We have plenty of experience among our two speakers with regard to the topic that they're going to present, and I shall say a few words about our organization, and then I will introduce our two speakers. So could you give me the next slide, please? Just a quick word about IERS, International Education and Research Services UK, is a company that we started a couple of years ago, myself and my colleague Mohammed Sully. And among our activities is organizing events such as this one, as well as various types of CPDs, training, and so on. Next slide, please. So, founded in 2018, and we really, the reason behind starting industry consultancy is to provide professional and academic development through knowledge acquisition. What does that mean? Basically, we organize the events where people exchange knowledge, experience, and learn a few things. We also offer advice and guidance to academics and researchers wishing to come to the United Kingdom. We are based in the United Kingdom, of course. We also have a number of language schools that we work with, and sometimes we refer people to them for whether be it short courses, long courses, one-year courses, language training, whatever, different types of facilities. Anyway, those of you who are interested, you can go to the website and find out more about our activities. So without ado, I'll just introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Sabrina Day. She studied pharmacy at the University of Nottingham, in the UK. She holds a Master in Pharmacy and a PhD in Drug Delivery and Tissue Engineering. She had various roles within the pharmaceutical industry and community pharmacy sectors. So when it comes to quality control and management, they don't come any bigger than the pharmaceutical industry. Our second presenter is Hassan Zaribi, who is a quality control engineer based in Algeria. Hassan is a professor at the Hassani Bounab Vocational Training College in Biskra, and he has extensive experience of involvement in quality control processes. So without ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Sabrina Day.
Thank you, Professor Buktah, for the kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Ramadan Kareem. I hope everyone is keeping safe amid the COVID-19 situation. I hope you and your loved ones are all safe and well. So today I'll be speaking to you about ISO 9001-2015. But before that, I wanted to take a step back and really talk about ISO as an organization and where it all started. So ISO was actually founded in 1947. And it's the world's largest developer of voluntary international standards. In 1946, there was 65 delegates from 25 countries met to discuss the future of international standardization. And then 1947, the ISO actually comes into existence with 67 technical committees. It is headquartered in Geneva and works in about 164 countries as it stands. And since 1947, they've published over 23,000 international standards covering almost all aspects of technology and business. And as I mentioned, they are now in 164 countries. Amongst those standards that we will be covering shortly today is the 9000 family, and that was published in 1987. It is actually the first quality management standard and have gone to become some of the most well-known and best-selling standards since its foundation. It was also you can see that ISO has actually moved throughout the years with technology, with how the world is moving. So they've issued in 2015 information security standard, and that's all to do with the management systems around that. As businesses become increasingly reliant on information technology, securing the system and minimizing risks is ever more important. And so the ISO 27001-2005 has become one of ISO's most popular standards, in addition to ISO 9000 family. Also, it was issued a standard related to bribery, and it is actually the first international anti-bribery management system standard that was designed to help organizations combat bribery risk in their own operations and throughout their global value chains. It has the potential to reduce corporate risk and costs related to bribery by providing a manageable business framework for preventing, detecting, and addressing bribery. So these are the three standards that I thought they are quite important in the history of ISO. Now, there are three official languages. It's English, French, and Russian. So all the standards are translated to French and Russian mainly. One might wonder, why is the acronym of International Organization for Standardization does not match the abbreviation ISO? So that is because the acronym is actually in the different languages, means something different. And so ISO went and abbreviated the name in reference to the Greek name isos, meaning equal. And the principle there is whatever the country, whatever the language, the standards should always be equal. Within ISO, there are three membership statuses that countries can be assigned to. Each enjoys a different level of access and influence over the ISO system. This helps the countries to be, or ISO to be inclusive, while also recognizing the different needs and capacity of each national standards body. So I wanted to cover the members only because our focus is Algeria in this presentation, or actually North Africa, in fact, with my colleague, Dr. Zribi, to actually go through the details of North Africa later on. But I wanted to actually draw the distinction between the memberships within ISO. So full members, actually, they influence ISO standards, development and strategy by either participating and voting in ISO technical and policy meetings. Full members sell and adopt ISO standards nationally. And then the second type is correspondent members, and these observe the development of ISO standards and strategy by attending ISO technical and policy meetings as observers. Correspondent members can sell and adopt ISO standards nationally as well as the full members. Subscriber member is kept up to date on ISO's work, but cannot participate in anything in terms of their direction, or there is no influence as such, and they can't really sell or adopt ISO international standards nationally. Taking that into account, like I said, the focus is Algeria and North Africa in general. Actually, Algeria is a full member of ISO, and the member body is called the Algerian Institute of Standardization. I was actually surprised when I was doing some research, when I was asked to present this, but Algeria was a participating member in technical committees for about 37 standards. And that really, really made me proud that Algeria has actually had and still has a voice within ISO strategy and can influence how the standards are being developed. And I felt really, as I said, I felt really proud. Algeria also was an observing member for about 33 standards, and that's a really good number as well. It was a participating member in 3 policy development committees. So that means policies are the overarching documents that influence where the directions of the standards go. And again, I was proud that Algeria was a participating member to influence that committee if needed. Just to drill down really on what is the role of the Algerian Institute of Standardization. And these are quite a few tasks that are listed on the ISO website as to what is Algeria doing, what is the body is actually responsible for. And the first thing is really to ensure the development of national standards in coordination with other sectors. So that means different industries need to talk to each other to come up with those national standards that could be a common point with all, so we can achieve a certain level of standardization. It also covers the identification of those needs. So it's not really about just applying what ISO is actually saying, is being proactive and going what actually the industries need, because that's important also to take into account. And we're going to come into details when we discuss about the interested parties. I think something quite important, or the role of the Algerian Institute of Standardization, is to make sure that these standards are actually implemented. So each company should have a plan on how do they want to see this standard being actually implemented. And again, we're going to come into quite a few details later on. Also, to help Algeria to have that voice and manage the national information point on to how does it communicate with the rest of the world when it comes to trade. So that standardization really helps the companies to be recognized at an international level. I think one key thing that I want to focus in this presentation is conformity. Conformity means that there is a certain compliance to those Algerian standards, so they are in place for a reason. And if a company actually decides to comply with those standards, then there should be plans in place to make sure that there is a compliance and a conformity within that. So these are a really group or a number of tasks that the Algerian Institute of Standardization does. So without further ado, I'd like to actually focus on what we want to talk about today, which is the ISO 9001-2015. It does specify requirements for a quality management system, and I want to focus on what does that actually mean. Throughout this presentation, I wanted to make sure that there is an understanding of why do we need a standard, how do we get the standard, and the results of that implementing that standard. So ISO 9001 really, it's got those list of standards that are help organizations to meet customers and other stakeholders' needs, and that can be related to any service or product. So it doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the company. The standards are standards, so that you can they are generic enough that can be applied to different sectors. I think when an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide those products and services to meet customer requirements, and most importantly, actually regulatory requirements, then those standards will come in to really handy, because that sets out exactly what you need to do. I will cover the aims later, but it's really, again, thinking about that end product. How does it look like? How can we achieve a really good quality product so that customers or regulators, most importantly, are satisfied with what we've that company has produced. So it is actually the most popular standard in the ISO 9000 series, and the only standard in the series to which organizations can certify to. So there are other standards that you can certify to, but it is actually really the most popular. I think the ISO 2000 or 27001, the IT security one, is becoming increasingly popular. So that's competing with it as well, because with the world being moving towards the digitization, so people are actually focusing more on the IT systems and the securities there. I think one of the beauties of 9001 is that it can be applied to any organization, any type, any size, regardless of its field of activity. I particularly like, I used to work for a small company and we applied ISO there. And I think that really helped for when the company was growing, that standard kept moving, so it could be expanded, but we didn't have trouble because we've set it up correctly according to ISO 9001. So when you set it, set the standards up when the company is quite small, when it gets larger, you're not going to struggle much, at least from my experience, and a lot of feedback from people that it actually helps keep things consistent. Again, there's a lot of discussion around the improvements of the QMS, etc., which I'm going to be covering later on. There are over, I think it was 1.1 million companies that I checked a couple of days ago, actually an organization that's certified to 9001. So that is quite a number. Since its inception, which was in 1987, so that's really, you know, it's a really, really big number, and they actually operate in over 170 countries there. Really, I think the most important thing I want to mention is that the standard is actually based on quality management principles, and these are set out by ISO separately. So there is the details of those I'm going to go shortly, but the principles are 7, and that goes throughout the whole standards, or the 9000 family. The aim, again, I think I'm going to cover the aim twice, because I want to make sure that when people leave this webinar, understand that standardization is not really there to complicate how companies should operate. It is meant to be helpful, and it is meant to ensure that there is a consistency and good quality products, which in turn obviously makes your business very successful. So I will say that again, but I just want to make sure that people go away thinking that standards are you know, a list of things that make life a bit complicated. But actually, and Dr. Zribi actually has got very good slides on how the data shows between the countries, and really it reiterates how the standardization is important. So I'd like to spend a bit of time on the QMS principles, on how actually that drove the 9001 standard. To start with, as I said, there's 7, and the first one is the customer focus principle. And the rationale behind that is that every aspect of customer interaction provides an opportunity to create more value for the customer. I think if I was a customer, I always think about it this way. If I was a customer, I'd like the other end to understand my current and future needs. So you always have to think about what is the end user. If the end user wants this feature or this service or this product, then let's take that as a feedback and feed it in. So the focus was always the customer, be it a regulator, be it patient, be it, so they always at the heart of this, at the heart of the organization. What does the customer want? And obviously, to sustain the success of any organization, regardless of its size or field, the focus is that heart. If that heart is happy and satisfied and etc., then that's it. The organization is considered successful by many principles. So that's really the customer focus aspect of it. Leadership. I think the second principle is really important. I think I want to cover it later on as well, but I think without a good leadership and unity and a clear strategic direction of that organization, the companies won't go anywhere. So leadership is really important because it aligns the strategies, the policies, the processes, the resources, and all of those will have to feed into the objectives of each company. So leaders are key, really key to establish that purpose and that direction of companies. The next principle is about engaging people. I'm a great believer in people because without people, no company would be successful, because people are the resources, people are the brains, people are the hands, people are pretty much everything, really. So I think to manage any organization effectively and efficiently, it is important to involve all people at all levels and to respect them as individuals, because that's important. You respect them, their opinions, empower them, respect their ideas, recognize them, enhance their competence, promote their training, etc. So this really gives them that engagement, listen to them, and this is, I think, leadership and engagement with people are quite linked, because leaders need to listen to how those people or the people at the company actually think, and essentially everyone looks at the same objective. We just, different people think about it differently, or different roles. So leaders and people who are working in the organization can be looking at things differently. One key thing, or the fourth principle, is actually taking that vision of a company and then apply that into what that means for the organization. That's done through the process approach. I'm one of a person, I'm in quality because of process. I absolutely love process. I think without process, nothing will be organized. Understanding how the results are produced by any system enables the organization to optimize it, optimize the system and the performance. Because without that process, without detailing what are the steps to achieve that result, then you will never know where does it go wrong, if that makes sense. So really the process approach involves the systemic definition and management of processes and their interactions, because each process needs to talk to the other. So you can't have one process that stand alone. They all talk to each other. Make sure that these processes obviously translate what that vision from the leadership is. So if we start off the vision at the top, or the objectives, and then that gets again translated to that process, so people understand what is it required to achieve those that objective. And I think the application of this approach enables the understanding and the consistency to meet any customer requirements. Because without understanding what we are trying to achieve, it will be quite difficult to achieve it. I think, and that's directly related to the effectiveness of any quality system, management system. And again, I think sometimes it's quite important to reflect on the evaluation of data. So that process always have to be evolving. It can't be just one process that we put one now and then we don't change it later. It has to be evolving. That's why I've seen over and over and again in many companies that the processes get revised every 2 years, 3 years, etc. Because that then you can check what are the updates in the world, regulatory requirements, etc., and then you implement that in there. So improvement is really key. I've just moved into the next point without thinking. Yeah, but as I said, it is essential. Improvement is essential for an organization to maintain current levels of performance. To create changes in its internal, external conditions, because any organization is influenced, and we're going to come later on to this. Any organization will have two influences, the internal, external. So you need, they need to understand what are the influences, how can we control that, how do we deal with it, not control it, I should say. It's more how to deal with it and how can we make sure that it doesn't affect the business as and it affects it in the right way. I think one key thing, or the sixth principle, is evidence-based decision making. It is not an easy task. I think it's a very complex process, at least from the field I'm in. To make a decision is always difficult. In the sense, sometimes it's even it involves some uncertainty. So sometimes you make a decision, but you're not sure whether this is the right decision or not. You take it with some risk, but you'd always have to make sure that you have some sort of evidence, or any organization, I should say, have some evidence why that decision was driven to. So you have some sort of information, sources of inputs. So you gather all of those facts and then interpret them to something that's meaningful to your organization. And then decisions are sometimes made by a group of people. One person can make a decision, but it has to be, I think it's a team's work. It can't be based on one person unless there is a massive conflict within the organization. So that one leader needs to make a decision. But the key thing actually is not the decision, it's the evidence-based. You need to make sure that there is enough facts and information and input that drives that decision. It's important to understand cause and effect relationships and potential unintended consequences. I think to do that, there is the analysis part of it as well. And to achieve, I think, what I call sensible decision making is that the objectivity has to be there. And to achieve objectivity, you have to have facts and confidence, and that provides you confidence in the decision making. The seventh and last but not least is relationship management. This is related to the interested parties, and we're going to cover that later on. And it will be achieved, or the sustained success of any organization is more likely to be achieved when the company manages relationships with all of its interested parties to optimize their impact on its performance. So it's not just one party, it's not just the customer. You have to think about the regulators, you have to think about the employees, you have to think about many parties, or that's the decision of the organization. What are the interested parties? How can that relationship actually work? How is that communication path is going to happen? And also, I think some organizations use third-party vendors or suppliers to achieve their goals. So those suppliers need to be also or the relationship with those suppliers is quite important, because they are doing sometimes a good chunk of the work that the organization needs for their products and services. So these are, in brief, the QMS principles that was used for the ISO 9001, and I thought that's quite important to set a scene on how is that important to ISO 9001. So the aims of ISO, and what I usually start, I'm going to start with the end user. So that's the aim, is to always make sure the customers are satisfied, or customers, I call it customer because the standard calls it customer, but that customer could be anybody, and the end user, whoever is using that, the end product, if that makes sense. And really, the potential benefits of the standardization is the ability to consistently provide those products or services and that meet the customer and applicable regulatory requirements. It also enhances that and the ability to demonstrate conformity to specified requirements. But to do that, like I said, if you just imagine with me the end product or the end result is the customer satisfaction. To do that, we need a quality management system according to ISO 9001. So the quality management system is the most important part, because this is driving your customer satisfaction. And that could be a set, and I've got an example of a QMS later on to show you. That's the pillars, if you like, of a house. So if the pillars of the house are a bit messy, wobbly, then the house is going to fall down. So the QMS is something similar. The QMS has to be really quite strong. It's very clear. It's got the right responsibilities and roles, and that's important. That's very important. To do that, we need three things, or three general things I'd like to summarize. We have the customer requirements. So that means the end user, we need to document exactly what they want. So if I was the end user, I'll say, okay, for that product, this is what I'd like to see, this is what I want to see, etc. And that feedback needs to be taken into consideration, regardless whether the company is small or big or etc. But that feedback, the current and the future needs of customers, is quite key. And then the context of the organization. So that means, which I'm going to cover quite shortly in detail, what are the challenges that an organization could face if we have future needs from customers that are quite impossible? For example, does that affect the business? Does that really, or if we have those future needs, does it actually have a good impact on the company? I think I already talked about interested parties, because no company is standing on its own. Nobody can do anything on their own. It's always a teamwork. It's always people working together, and that comes to the seventh principle, relationship management, to achieve a particular thing. So transparency, honesty is quite important, and also finding out who are the interested parties. So when an organization decides to implement 9001, they need to think about who's going to influence their strategic direction of that QMS. Is it, so for example, I'm going to cover it again later on, is it suppliers, customers, patients, I don't know, regulators, etc. So they need to actually draw that and document it as to who can influence their vision. But really, I think with this slide, I just want to make sure that the aims of ISO is not a list of standards that doesn't actually make sense and it's all generic. And actually, in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's very generic so it can be applicable to different fields and different different sizes of organizations. But the main aim is to achieve that consistency of process. So hopefully that message is across now to you all, guys. I think, before I go to that, I think I wanted to go through the drilling down now of how does the QMS come about. And the cycle that's been there for years now, or even within this standard, is the PDCA cycle, which is plan, do, check, plan, do, check, and act. And this really can be applied to all processes and to the quality management system as a whole. So I go to the next slide, that's it. So planning is what you usually start with. So you've got the QMS in mind, you've got the objectives of the relevant customers' needs and requirements. So how do we actually achieve that? So planning is establishing those objectives of the processes and the systems and the resources needed to deliver those results in accordance with the customer's requirements. And the other thing is, I'd like to take you back a little bit, is the risk-based thinking. And I will focus on it over and over again within this presentation, because not every company can sort of comply with all the standards out there. They just need to make sure that they have a risk-based thinking. How is it affecting them? Why did they not comply? And that is documented. So planning is also considered the identification and addressing of those risks and opportunities for improvement. And then the second part of the cycle is doing it. And that's implementing what was planned. So in a plan, you've got the objectives, you've got, according to the customer requirements, you've got a list of things to achieve, the resources you need to achieve it, etc. Now it's time to do it. How do you operate it? And the principle 7, or the clause 7 and 8 would apply in this case of the ISO 9001, because that to do it, you need operation and you need support, to make sure that those actions that you've planned are being done. So the next step is checking, really, and that principle, the performance evaluation, is quite key, which I'm going to cover each clause separately. So checking is really monitoring and measuring the process and the resulting products and services against whatever objectives, requirements, planned activities, and reporting those results. So the performance evaluation is quite key, because this is how you're going to measure what you've planned is actually being done, and that takes us nicely to the last bit, bit of the cycle, which is acting. So anything that comes from the checkpoint where you do the performance evaluation, any actions from there that could feed in very nicely into improving your QMS, and that's how you act on it. So improvement is a key when it comes to ISO 9001. I think I left leadership at the heart, because really I do believe that leaders are key in terms of driving that strategic direction of the organization. There needs to be clear objectives, and I'm going to cover the principle in detail. Clear objectives, they need to be really thinking about how do we see this organization in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and how do we get there, and what things do we need to put in place to make sure that this company stays successful. So I think I wanted to cover the clauses of 9001, which is probably what you're expecting, I hope, as well. And in terms of the clauses, there are 10 clauses. But on the upcoming slides, I'm not going to talk about 1 to 3, which are the general scope and normative references and terms and definitions, and those are really a general introduction to the standard. They're not directly audited against for when the organization wants to certify or get certified, but because they provide context and definitions for the rest of the standard, their contents must be taken into account. So bear that in mind. The fact that I'm not talking about it, or any because consultancies will mention 1 to 3, doesn't mean that it's not applicable. It is actually, it provides context and definitions for the rest of the standard. So these are the main clauses. The other thing I wanted to mention, that within ISO 9001, there are verbal forms, and I really would like to focus on that. So the verbal forms used, they've got shall, should, may, and can. So if the standard says the organization or the company shall, that indicates requirements. So you have any company needs to comply with that. If the standard says should, that means that indicates a recommendation. Okay, and then if the standard says the organization may, that indicates a permission. So you may do that. And then if the standard says can, then that indicates a possibility or capability to do something. Okay, so but the most important one is shall, because that's what you're going to be audited against. The rest, should, may, and can, but they are good options. They're very good. I'm not disregarding them in any way, but the shalls must make sure that the organization actually complies to that. Okay, so we've got the 10 standards and context of the organization, leadership, which we briefly touched upon, planning, support, operation, performance, evaluation, and improvement. I would like to go through each clause in detail. I just want to check how we're doing for time with the team, but I think I still have time. So
we're okay.
So, yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. So in terms of the context of the organization, it is important in the sense that the influences, the influences of how that organization is driving its strategic vision is quite important, and I'll come to that into shortly. So internal and external contexts are, so we separate it. So it's internal and it's external. It's always thinking about the inside and the outside, and the issues raising from that, because that's to find out the issue is actually the half of the problem. So you need to make sure that those issues are identified and documented. The internal issues or the internal context can be identified through listing those problems that you could encounter. So that could include, I don't know, regulatory requirements, strategies to conform to your policies and achieve your objectives, relationship with the staff, stakeholders, partners and suppliers, resources and knowledge. So sometimes if you get a newbie, a new person that doesn't know how to do the task, maybe that would actually have an internal issue. The standards out there, the information system, the infrastructure. So these are all internal issues, or the internal context that an organization needs to take into account. And understanding the internal context can be facilitated by considering issues related to values, culture, knowledge, performance of the organization. So these are quite key elements to consider when looking at the internal issues. For the external issues or the challenges that a company might have, that could arise really from social, technological, environmental, ethical, political, legal, and economic environments. So again, you just need to make sure that there is a list of things that could influence the companies. For example, it may include updates to the government regulations and changes in the law, economic shifts in the markets, the competition levels, events that may affect the corporate image, changes in technology, which is quite key because technology is actually moving really faster than anything else, really. And you have to think about the international, national, regional, or local changes. So it's not just the national, if that makes sense. You have to think about the whole, the global effect, the national and the regional changes as well. So coming back to the interested parties, which I mentioned, touched upon earlier, likely, the interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. So that needs to be decided by any organization. So when the organization needs to actually, or makes that decision of getting certified to 9001, they need to sit down and define what is an interested party. That could be customers, suppliers, regulators. It could be anything that can, or that is relevant to the quality management system. It could also be the staff, the resources that they have. And that actually drives very nicely to drawing that scope of the QMS, because you have to actually think of, it's almost like adding the issues identified internally, externally, plus the needs of the interested parties' requirements, and then that draws up the scope of the QMS. But the main thing, and I will have to say that many times, is that if it's not documented, it's not done. So you might have all this exercise, you document your issues, you know what your interested parties want, but then nothing is documented in the QMS. So documenting those decisions in a QMS is very important. Sometimes I went to an organization where there was no QMS, there is no QMS, so they've done the legwork, but they haven't actually documented anything, which is not really, it gives the auditor nothing to look at, basically, nothing official, I should say. So really, I think the drawing the scope of the QMS is going to come from these couple of things that needs to be decided about. And to define the influences of various elements on the organization, how they reflect on the QMS, the company's culture and objectives, and that very nicely goes into the scope. So and the objectives and the vision of that particular company. Moving on to the leadership, I think when I read the standard and when we applied it and when I audit against it, the leadership we have to see a commitment from the leadership. Commitment in the sense that, or with respect to the quality management system, by taking responsibilities for the effectiveness of the QMS, ensuring that the policy objectives and the quality objectives are established for the quality management system. It promotes the use of process approach that we touched upon earlier and risk-based thinking. So, and it promotes improvements as well. But the main drives for any leadership within any company is the customer focus. If we go back to the QMS principles that I was talking about earlier, it's always the customer at the heart, be it a patient, end user, company, service, product, anything, that's at the heart. So the focus has to always be their focus as well. And the commitment is not really about, again, the customer focused part of it. It's also about the identifying those risks and opportunities that could actually have an effect, whether it's bad or good, on the conformity of that product, and enhancing the customer satisfaction. So making sure that customer is happy it should always be part of the commitments of that leadership, and that's really clearly outlined in the ISO 9001. I spoke earlier about documenting it. So documenting what was the leadership committing to, that needs to be somewhere. So it needs to be an overarching policy, and that policy needs to document the commitment of to satisfy the applicable requirements, be it the regulatory or the ISO or the standard, and also a commitment to the continual improvement of that QMS. I mentioned earlier the promotion of the use of the process approach and risk-based thinking, because that's the most important thing in ISO 9001 is to make sure that there is a process approach to achieve the objectives necessary. And I mentioned also the promotion of improvement, but for the leadership to actually drive that ship with the strategic direction of the company, it's not just writing the vision, it's also supporting it, because without supporting it, obviously that ship is going to be sailing and sinking, really. Moving on to clause number 6, which is planning. That's really related to the identified risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. We've mentioned already in the context of organization on how we can actually look at internal and external issues and interested parties, and that is from there you've got a list of plans that could or will be actioned later on. I think I wanted to draw some attention on the quality objectives, because the quality objectives, so the leadership have got a quality policy, but they also have a clear objectives of the company, quality objectives of the company. And I think it's about not just the planning of those objectives, but also making sure that there is a quality objective at every level in the organization to achieve a effective QMS, obviously maintaining documentation related to that. But going back to the quality objectives, what do we need to have there to make sure that people understand why is it there? Why do we need to document those objectives? So I think the first one is the what. What are the objectives? What will be done? What does the organization need to achieve? What is it that they need to do? So you need to define that, and that needs to be absolutely clear. As I said, it should be sometimes at the relevant functions at every level. Not necessarily all departments, because that's going to be a killer. You can't do it at all departments, but you could select where it could be applicable, like the operations department, the support, the IT, etc. I think the other important is what resources are required to achieve that QMS, because then without those resources, your objectives won't be achieved. Who will be responsible? And that is linked to the leadership, and the resources. So both who's going to do what. So we've got leaders who draw objectives, and then we've got resources who achieve those objectives. When will it be completed? This always will depend on how the when does the customer needs those products or etc. And I think the next one is the how. How are we going to evaluate those results? How are we going to evaluate those objectives? And the where is actually sometimes, where is it going to be done? It might be a supplier, third-party supplier, it could be at the company, etc. But that needs to be drawn very clearly. I think one important thing to mention here is the changes, because I mentioned earlier that QMSs or processes should always be evolving, so there will be a change at some point in life and within the life of the company. So that change needs to be planned. It needs to be organized in the sense that it has an integrity to the quality. It doesn't actually affect the integrity of the QMS. It is available to the resources, etc. So making sure that those changes are absolutely planned or conducted in a really planned manner. I think the next clause is support, and I'm going to touch briefly upon the main clauses of the or sub clauses of ISO 9001 there. The first one is resources. I think, as I mentioned earlier, without people, you can't do anything. And without empowering these people, you can't do anything. That organization is not going to go far at all. So people and their training, which is another sub-clause later on, I will mention it later on, is very, very important to have an effective implementation of the QMS for any organization. Infrastructure is another thing. So what do people need to achieve within that organization? So that means, do they need equipment? Do they need transportation resources? Do they need information communication technology? Do they need different, I don't know, softwares and hardwares, etc.? Do they need a specific building? Do they need fit for purpose building? It depends, or purpose build, sorry, labs, for example. So that infrastructure is key as well, and the right environment for them to operate in. You can't have people who are unhappy in the organization and expect good results. So I think the environment for the operation is really key, in the sense that that could be could involve anything from social to psychological to physical. So making sure that there is a right temperature, for example, in a manufacturing set, is very important. There's a right level of hygiene. There is a right level of light. In terms of psychological, for example, you can't have an environment where everyone is stressed. Nobody can work very well at stress, in a stressed environment, but they need to feel protected somehow. And then in terms of the social aspects of it within ISO, the social environment is that the environment shouldn't be discriminatory. So it should be very calm, it should be very supportive and very open and transparent. So that's related to the resources, and you can see that actually is quite key. I really believe that resources are the key to make sure that a company is actually sustains its success. Competence is another key one, which is related to the resources. I think within ISO, it defines it as that person who have an appropriate education, training, or experience. So if somebody new joins the company, they need to have the necessary training to bring them up to speed. So we shouldn't exclude somebody who doesn't have experience, for sure. We just need to make sure that they trained and qualified to do the task they need to do. And that's competence. Maybe they've got the education, but they don't have the experience. But experience only be gained by training in that particular role. Awareness is another key within the standard, which that really implies that people who are working within the organization are aware of what the expectations are in relation to the quality policy, the quality objectives, how can they contribute to effective QMS, and the implications of non-conformity. Communication is another key, that the organization needs to be clear as to what is it they need to communicate internally or externally. So if there is an update to the organization, to the leadership, how are they going to communicate that? Where is it going to be documented? Who's going to communicate that, etc. So that needs to be absolutely clear. I think I already mentioned it, but I'm going to insist on that anything that's not documented is considered not done. So everything that the organization decides, it has to be documented. Moving on nicely to the operation side of things. So this is where the work actually gets done, because we've planned it, we've got a lot of support, we've got competent people and who are aware of the quality objectives. Now it's time to actually go into the operation side of things. And that's the first one is planning and control. So it's always about implementing that process and making sure that there are controls in place to meet the requirements of the relevant, the end results, the end product, and to implement any actions from the planning or etc. But the key is to make sure that there is established criteria for the process and for the product to be accepted later on. I think the key within planning or the sub-clause of within ISO is making sure that the inputs and the outputs of any of this particular phase is clear. So you need to know what is it that I want to achieve, how do I achieve that, and what do I have to achieve that. So it's very key to determine that at the very start, and taking into consideration the outsourced activities. For example, what if you're using other external providers? We already touched upon the requirements. So requirements are really important because that's what drives everything, really. So you need the customer requirements, the regulators requirements necessary for any organization to be successful. So you need to understand those requirements, not just understanding the initial requirements. You need to keep up with the changes to those requirements. So maybe the feedback that you get from your customers or patients or whatever, that feedback will feed into the changes to those requirements, and it depends on your customers, etc. The next phase is design and development. So that's the technical, if you like, the technical phase where things are going to, or the planning requirements are translated into one document, for example, that details how is it going to be designed and developed. And they have to be really complete and unambiguous. So it has to be clear. It can't be, vague or anything like that. It has to be really clear. The next step is the control of externally provided processes. I mentioned earlier that any organization to achieve the objectives that they want is going to be a teamwork. Nobody can do anything on their own. So if they are outsourcing some of the externally provided processes, then they need to make sure that or determine and apply the criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of the performance of that supplier, because without that, you don't have any assurance that they're doing what they're supposed to do, if that makes sense. So the externally providing the externally provided processes and products and services need to make sure that vendor, that supplier, is doing what they're supposed to do. And one way to do it is to evaluate it. So you need to go every 2 years or audit them or post a questionnaire, etc., to make sure that any changes within their QMS doesn't influence your or the organization that needs to take into consideration in the future. This is the next phase is the production, and the production is really where again the design is actually coming into action, if that makes sense. So this is where we have the end product, and I think the key in this sub clause is that it details how any changes that happen throughout that production line is being dealt with. Any non-conformity is actually being dealt with and documented. So it's bound to happen, something bound to happen within any operation. So if there is a problem with production, it needs to be identified, root cause, investigated and documented. And then the next step is the release. The release of the product, which is really when the end user or the customer gets that product or service, it's all about traceability, making sure that you've got a traceability from step one to the final step of the release, and that's what the auditors would be looking out for. I already touched upon the non-conformance, whereby any issues identified in the operation phase needs to be investigated, root cause documented, and then actions taken to address those issues. The next clause is the performance evaluation before last. So the performance evaluation is very important because this is how you know that your product is actually done to the standard that the customer wants, the regulators want. So the first one is actually monitoring whether the customer is happy about that service or product or whatever you're supplying. Is making sure that that feedback is collected, is analysed, and that information actually translated into something that's understandable to management or leadership, so it feeds back into the improvement of the QMS. Another way of performing evaluation is through internal audits. I'm an internal auditor, and I absolutely love those audits, not because that's the only way to find out whether the company is actually complying with the standards. And management review is another method to actually make sure that the objectives set by the leadership are met. And to do that, all of this data from the monitoring and internal audits needs to be represented for management review. What I've seen is that once a year there is this big meeting with management and presentations related to the evaluation of customers' feedback or internal audits, CAPAs, any changes to the QMS that needs to be done. That gets discussed at the management review. The last clause is about improvement. I already mentioned that the QMS really is a living organism. So living organism changes regularly. So anything that in terms of corrective actions from issues identified, it just keeps changing. It has to be evolving. It can't be one thing and it doesn't change. So to address future needs of customers, to come up with an action plan to correct some issues and prevent them in the future, to deal with non-conformities, and also, or most importantly, is to make sure that there is documented information around those activities. I think I already mentioned the potential benefits of ISO 9001, and I'd like to summarize it in four bullet points, and that's consistency, because if you don't have that consistency, then nothing is going to be achieved according to the standard. And I think the key thing is that if you want a sustained success, then that's one key thing. And I think the ISO 9001 is definitely one way to do it. Continuous improvement is key, maintenance and reproducibility. This is an example of a QMS that I worked with at some point. So these are ISO 9001 company, and they've done they've set out the quality manual. They've got a certain or number of SOPs that describes personnel and training, vendors management or suppliers management, change control, auditing, and most importantly is quality risk management, which is really directly translating the risk-based thinking of this particular standard. I think I would like to summarize the 9001 before I finish off in a couple of points, really, in my own words. That QMS, you set it up. So basically, you say what you do. So you've set up your objectives. This is what we want to do, and then you implement it. So you really do what you say, and then comply with it. So prove that you've done what you've said you'll do, and then improve it, which is the corrective action, preventative action. So that feeds back into the QMS and improve it as you go along. Really, I want to, before I finish, I want to leave you with this quote that one of the reasons I'm in quality is that quality is never an accident. It is really always the result of high intention and intelligent direction. I really believe that. And I think ISO 9001 is one of those standards that actually show that skillful execution of the processes. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I will be happy to take any questions later on at the end of the webinar. But for now, I will hand it over to Dr. Zribi for his parts of the presentation.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة باي. إذا ممكن تعطوني إمكانية عرض الشاشة نتاعي فقط. شكرا. بسم الله، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معكم زريب حاتم، مهندس دولة في مراقبة النوعية والتحاليل، أستاذ متخصص في التكوين المهني بمعهد حسني بنان في الإسراء. إذا ربما راكم تعجبوا وعلاش راني نتحدث باللغة العربية. السبب الأول لأنه الإنجليزية تاعي ماهيش بالجودة تاع دكتورة باي. السبب الثاني باش نبرهن لكم بإذن الله بأنه اللغة ماهيش هي المشكل. الإيزو والنظام نتوحد بصفة عامة، الهدف نتاعهم هو توحيد اللغة بين المؤسسات في دول العالم كامل، ولكن مش من اللغة، توحيد لغة التنظيم وتوحيد لغة العمل. نقدر نقرأ الإيزو 9001 باللغة الإنجليزية وإلا باللغة العربية، ولكن الخدمة راهي هي نفسها، سواء في الجزائر وإلا في المملكة المتحدة وإلا في أي دولة واحدة أخرى. إذا حبيت نعطيكم بعض الأرقام باش نديروا الموقع نتاع الجزائر ما بين الأرقام هذه ونعرفوا رواحنا ورانا في الجزائر ورانا رايحين بإذن الله. عندي الإحصائيات هذه كما نقولوا جبتها من الموقع الرسمي نتاع الإيزو، تتعلق بعدد شهادات الممنوحة إيزو 9001 من طرف مؤسسات الإشهاد المعتمدة. مؤسسات الإشهاد نقصد بها certification bodies. ملاحظة فيها فقط مؤسسة إشهاد كاين اللي ماهيش معتمدة ولكن تقدر تمد شهادة الإيزو، وكاين اللي راهي معتمدة وتمد كيف شهادة الإيزو. وش هو الفرق بيناتهم؟ اللي ماهيش معتمدة الشهادة نتاعها فعالة داخل الوطن، ولكن المعتمدة الشهادة تاعها تكون عالمية. إذا بالنسبة للجزائر الإيزو بدات في سنة 1998. كما راكم تشوفوا كاين تطور وكاين زيادة في عدد منح الشهادات. في نهاية ديسمبر 2018 كان عندنا 509 شهادة إيزو 9001 في الجزائر. في نقارن الأرقام هذه بدول مجاورة مثل تونس والمغرب ومصر، راح نلاحظوا بلي أرقام الجزائر ضعيفة جدا. تقريبا نصف الشهادات الممنوحة في دولة تونس ودولة المغرب، وتقريبا ربع الشهادات الممنوحة في دولة مصر. هذا إن دل على شيء فإنما يدل بأنه رانا ما زلنا متأخرين ولازمنا نلحقوا بالركض. نزيدوا ندخلوا معطيات المملكة المتحدة في الإحصائيات نتاعنا. حتى الأرقام نتاع دولة مصر رايحين يبانوا صغار. هذا راهي نفس المعطيات وإنما زدنا معها برك أرقام دولة المملكة المتحدة. 26434 شهادة ممنوحة في نهاية ديسمبر 2018. في نفس السياق نريد ندخلوا دولة واحدة أخرى اللي هي جمهورية الصين الشعبية، رايحين نشوفوا باللي حتى أرقام المملكة المتحدة راهي ضعيفة. ما يخفاش علينا بأنه اقتصاد الصين ينمو نمو سريع جدا، وفي نفس الوقت حتى الشهادات ودكتور لي، وبإذن الله راح نديروا مجموعة من الدورات التدريبية على الأقل ننفع بها الناس. صح. ما في الجزائر لازمتنا نتصرفوا كأفراد ولازمتنا نتصرفوا كمؤسسات من أجل تحسين الجودة نتاع المنتوجات نتاعنا. الحاجة الأولى بالنسبة للأفراد لازم نبداو بالقراية. أول كلمة قالها ربي سبحانه بالرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وتبقى مطبقة علينا كاملة: اقرأ. السؤال مش هي الحاجة اللي رايحين نقراها. أول حاجة لازمك تقراها هي لا نورم نتاع الإيزو 9001. لا نورم هذه راهي تتباع، تلقاها في الموقع نتاع الإيزو، وإلا تلقاها عند الإيانور اللي ذكرتها الدكتورة باي سابقا. بعد القراءة لازم تستغل البيانات هذو، تابع دروس عبر الانترنت. جائحة كورونا صح مشكل كبير، ولكنها مدت فرصة انه اغلبية المؤسسات راهي تدير في دروس مجانية. استغلوا الفرصة وحاولوا في تطوير انفسكم. في وقت الوقت مناسب حاول تكون عندك شهادة تكوين كما نقولوا رسمي، وساهم في نشر هذه الثقافة. بالنسبة للمؤسسات لازم يكون تكوين مستمر للموظفين في هذا النشر. على بالنا احنا باللي المؤسسات اللي عندنا ساعات يكون عندهم نوع شويه خلينا نقولوا من البخل انه يصرف على المكونين نتاعو، على الموظفين نتاعو باش يكونهم، ولكنها حاجه ضروريه. تعود الموظف نتاعك كفء، تعود فاهم شنو راهو يدير، المؤسسه تاعك رايحه تتطور. حصول على استشاره الخبراء، حصول على شهاده او مجموعه من الشهادات. عندنا في الجزائر زوز مؤسسات إشهاد معتمدة، عندك فانسوت الجيري وعندك بي ال سي الجيري. هذا يقدر أي مؤسسة تتصل بهم من أجل تنصيب نظام الإيزو في وإلا الحصول على شهادة إيزو 3001 في المؤسسة. عندك تحسين مستمر، تحسين مستمر في إطار الإيزو 3001. في الأخير عندي مجموعة من المواصفات ننصحكم أنكم تقرأوها إذا أمكن تتحصلوا على شهادة فيها. الأولى هي الإيزو 9001، موضوعنا الإيزو 19000 اللي تتعلق بالمبادئ التوجيهية لتطبيق مبادئ الجودة، هذه مهمة جدا. تقدر ثاني دير تكوين في الإيزو 14001 اللي متعلقة بإدارة البيئة. كاينه ثاني بالنسبه للصناعات الغذائيه الايزو 22000 اللي متعلقه بسلامه المواد الغذائيه. وعندك الايزو 27000 واحد اللي تعتبر مهمه جدا 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 بالنسبه للمؤسسات اللي حابه تكون عندها ارضيه عبر الانترنت، لانه شيء متعلقه بسلامه بامن المعلومات. هذا ما لدي. اذا كان عندكم اسئله اطرحوها، ودرك ننقل الكلمة للدكتورة باي من أجل الإجابة على الأسئلة بتاعكم، وشكرا جزيلا.
شكرا حاتم. will await questions. ننتظر الأسئلة من الحاضرين. كان سؤال من قبل.
Yeah, I can see it from Sumia Rahmani, I think.
Yeah. And there are some more coming now. So do you want to take the Sumi's question, please? If you read the question and go for the answer, so that the rest of the audience will know the question. And
yes, absolutely. And Dr. Dribi, please chip in if I've missed anything, or if you want to add anything as well to the answers. So the first question is from Sumia. Great. So the first question is from Sumia Rahmani, and the question says, please, in which sectors ISO is applicable and what percentage do construction sector have? So, as I said earlier, it is applicable to any field of activity, regardless of what that organization does. So, small, large, medium, pharmaceutical, construction, anything. So it is applicable to absolutely any sector. Now, what percentage do construction sector have? That I have to look into. Maybe Dr. Dribi or Professor Bukdeh would actually add anything there. I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, so I can't answer that question, but we can look into it and we can email you the information. I hope that answered your question. I think there was another question about from Full Ikram, which are the websites about those courses to get certified. We can also send those.
I apologize. I was answering the question, or I was adding to your question, and I had my microphone switched off. Oh,
Oh,
can I say again what I was saying while the microphone was off?
of course, please go ahead. Yeah.
I was adding to what you mentioned in your answer to the question, and I said that I don't know about the situation in Algeria, but certainly in the UK, I would not imagine in the construction industry, I wouldn't imagine any company, and particularly any public limited company, wouldn't have an ISO certification. It just wouldn't happen for several reasons. One is customer satisfaction. Consumers or customers will always ask or will see you through your certification. And also funding and projects. You will not attract construction projects if you don't have certification. So that's for the UK. But الجزائر ما نعرفش. ممكن حاتم يضيف شوية.
معليش كنت عندي سؤال برك ما سمعتوش.
صبرينا السؤال.
السؤال قال please in which sectors ISO is applicable and what percentage do construction sector have?
هي المعطيات راهي كاينه. اذا كان نبارطاجي معكم دقيقه برك. لو كان نبارطاجي معكم واحد المعلومات ونشوفوا.
هو خاصة الجزء الثاني من السؤال، يعني نسبة الشركات اللي يستعملوا ISO 9000 أظن في الجزائر السؤال.
نسبة الشركات ضئيلة جدا لأنه العدد الشهادات راهو 509 فقط.
من عدد
509 شهادة.
من إجمال شركات، عدد إجمالي تاع الشركات كم هو؟
الله أعلم، عدد إجمالي الشركات الله أعلم.
But I guess we can find that information. We can email you, Sumia. I think there is another question. Which are the websites about courses to get certified? So I think I can speak for the UK. Maybe Hatem can add on the Algerian side of things. So in the UK, there are few companies who give you certification. One of them is the BSI, which I know of and I've been trained there. So the British Standards Publications. So that's one company in the UK. I don't know if Dr. Zribi wants to add on from Algeria side.
المؤسسات الإشهاد في الجزائر كاينة منها بزاف ومتنوعة، وإنما اللي عندهم اعتماد حاليا من الجيرات هما هي فانسوت الجيري والاخرى بي سي اي الجيري، وكاين فيريتاس. اي شركه اي مؤسسه اشهاد عندها اعتماد ماهوش شرط من الجيرات تاع الجزائر فقط، من اي مؤسسه اعتماد عالميه راهي تقدر تمد الشهاده. يسمى باغ اكزومبل فانسوت الجيري. نعم
حاتم من فضلك، هل عندك مثلا الويب سايت نتاع فانسوت هادو الاسماء اللي سميتهم فانسوت او بي سي اي او الجيري؟
كاين الويب سايت نتاعهم، تحبوا نفتحوا دركا ولا نبعثوا لهم الويب سايت بار ايميل؟
ابعثوا في الايميل او
بي سي اي ما عندهاش ويب سايت. بي سي اي ما عندهاش ويب سايت. فانسوت عندها ويب سايت.
او اذا سهل نكتبوها هنا في الشات ممكن، اذا صغير مثلا.
والله اعلم. الله اعلم، نبعثوه بار ايميل.
اوكي شكرا.
شكرا. So I think the next question is, can you suggest sites offering ISO training that you have listed? I think I'm just gonna put that out there, that in the future, inshallah, we will plan to do some ISO training. So we will be coming to Algeria. In terms of websites, I guess like Dr. Sribim just mentioned, so maybe checking out the Al-Jarak website to see what sort of training they can provide. But certainly from our side, we are planning that in the future. I don't want, I'm not sure if Dr. Sribim wants to add anything to that.
كاين مؤسسات يديروا لي فورماسيون كاينين بزاف، كاين من بينهم الجيراك في ذاتها راه يدير تكوين، كاين هذه اللي في الجزائر هذه اللي ننصح بهم، وكاين مؤسسات خاصه بزاف يعني
بس يصبروا حتى نجوهم احنا.
يصبروا
Okay. There is the next question. Can the ISO certification?
Can the ISO certification no longer be valid and be taken off? I think that's very rare. From Noor Yaqeen, it's very rare. Once they submit to ISO standards, they will have to be they will have to pay an annual recertification fee to retain the certified status. But as long as they meet the conditions of ISO, then they will remain certified indefinitely. I've never heard of it that it can be taken off unless the company decides to just not comply. So I think it's probably the chances are next to none, if I'm honest. So I think once a company decides to comply to that standards, then that's it.
We have another question from Sumaya Rahmani.
Yeah, to define the interest and needs of customers, what's the sample size that's required for eligibility and transparency? Very good question. I think when it comes to sample sizing, I wouldn't actually sample size. I would take everything into consideration because eliminating some of those needs might actually have adverse effects in the future. So I think maybe unless the company is absolutely large and they can't accommodate the needs of all customers, then that's going to be quite difficult to manage. So if it is a small or medium, even large, I think they should look at every single need from every single customer because you can't include one and exclude the other. If the company decides to actually sample size, then there should be, going back to process approach, there should be a process in place to prioritize which needs to come first. And that needs to be absolutely clear, and that drives that risk-based decision because that's what you need to show to the ISO auditors, and that's what you show to your customers, why one customer needs were prioritized compared to the other. So if it was my company, I would definitely consider everything. But you can only do so much, and sometimes it needs a lot of resources and time. If the company decides to go on a risk-based approach, then that needs to be documented. What is the criteria that defines that prioritization for any needs to be eligible? And obviously transparency is very key, so they need to communicate that to all their customers. I actually have seen it. I've seen it in few companies. They take the feedback from people, from the customers, but they can't implement everything they ask for. They just have to prioritize what is going to be making sense to their organization and doesn't affect the context or taking the context of the organization as a whole. I hope that answers your question, Sumia.
Do we have any other questions?
I haven't seen anything yet.
There was a question earlier on from one of the participants. It's not a technical question. It's more of, I can't remember, I think it's she, unfortunately couldn't remember the name. She was asking will she get certificates having participated in this webinar? Where is Mohammed? Is he online? Can he hear us?
I think he's online, but he's probably sharing his screen. So maybe we can get back to the lady later, because I can see that he's sharing live on Facebook, so he won't be able to.
Oh, okay. He's the public face of. He loves Facebook.
Yeah.
I can't see any other questions unless there are some comments. أمين she said جزاكم الله خيرا وفيكم كل البركة والخير أمينة.
I think there's a question from Samia just now.
Okay.
About process approach, what are they, please? Okay, so process approach is really I'm trying to say in simple terms. So the process approach is describing what are the steps you need to take for that process to be successful. So this is what's called the process approach. So you need to, for something to be achieved, you need to have that systemic definition and management of all those steps. So you can say, for example, I'm trying to give you an example so you can imagine what it is. So process around, say, training, okay? Take training as a process. So you need to do step 1, this is what needs to be done. Step 2, this is what needs to be done. Step 3, this is what needs to be done. So these steps define your approach. How do you make sure that that process is successful? Okay, so it's all about the systemic thinking, understanding what that process looks like. I hope that makes sense, Sumia. It's almost like because it's Ramadan, I'm going to talk about making bagharir, for example. Bagharir, you need certain ingredients. So to have
احنا صايمين وتحكي لنا على البغرير. It's torture. Before we get another question from the audience, can I ask the audience a question? Can I ask them to raise their hands? Can they do that? If
sorry.
If I ask the audience
can I just
to
finish
raise. Sorry, I didn't know you because I couldn't hear you. So you go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. So I was just saying about the process approach. So if it is, for example, making bagharir, you need the ingredients. You need to have a process on how you're gonna make that successful bagharir, so your guests are gonna enjoy it. So it's the strategic.
Oops. I think we lost Look today. I hope she. You're back with us.
I don't know where you got up to. Sorry, apologies. I lost that.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that this is the best analogy I could think of in terms of what is a process approach. So process approach is making sure that you've got the right ingredients, the right environment, the right strategic planning of how to make a successful bagharir so your guests are happy.
Well, can I share something with you all? I used to work in my previous university, Creative Arts. I used to teach on the architecture course, and second year students, architecture, we get them actually as part of introducing them to management, quality management processes. They actually make a cake. In small groups, they find the best recipe they want for a particular cake. They buy the ingredients, they make the cake, and they sell it. And the money they make goes towards the end of the year show. And the group that makes more money, but also for the best cake, also they get a prize. So the Bahrain example is a case in point.
Yeah, it's a very good process approach.
Yeah. I was going to ask the audience a question. Now I'll ask them the question, and I can just get them to raise their hands if they agree to what I'm going to ask them. So I'm going to ask the audience if
sorry,
yeah.
There is one last question. It seems it just came through.
It's okay. We'll come back to it. It's not.
All right.
Oh
okay.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh no, we're not finishing.
Okay. I thought it was finished. Okay.
No, it's not. I just wanted to ask the question so that while most of them are still listening to us. The question is this: if we come to you over there in Algeria, wherever it is in Algeria, عاصمة في تلمسان في بسكرة في الغواط, wherever, if we come to you with some sort of an event, workshop, hands-on approach, whether be it for something like this ISO or whether be it for something else that addresses your needs, would you be willing to take part, even if it's paid events? Because we come to you all the way, so we will have expenses. So if you are willing to attend paid events in Algeria, could you raise your hands now so that I can see a show of hands to give us an idea of interest? I can see, yes, yes, few hands. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 out of 30, 1/6. Okay. So maybe it's something worth thinking about, and we would give you the opportunity to also suggest to us if you wanted a particular event. We can do anything except العرس ما نديروش. So that's out of the question. anything else to do with whether be it architecture, the urban environment, construction industry, design, management, we can do it. So
I was going to say we need a very complex process approach for العرس.
لا غالبا انا ما نشتيش العرس دونك it's not my scene. We have a question. Shall we go back to the question?
Yeah, I think it was from Hamid Ghamras. I'm sorry, my French is very rusty, so I will try to read it, and please don't laugh at my pronunciation. Il y a des sociétés en Algérie qui achètent des certificats mais ne respectent pas les normes qualité. Comment on peut exiger à ces sociétés de respecter ces normes? Merci. So I think I will reply in English. It's easy for me. So I think
achète des certificats mais ne respecte.
Is that the?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? In any case, so I think you can. Okay, great. So I think the key thing to make sure that a company
Hello. We seem to have.
Can you hear me now?
We can now, but we lost you for a while.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I think it's just maybe sometimes it's with. Can you hear? Can you hear me? Okay.
We can now. Before we couldn't.
Yeah, I think it's just the technical issues of having a webinar. So I'm glad that everyone can hear me now. I was just trying to answer Hamid's question about companies who are not, they actually buy the certificates, but they don't respect the norms or the standards of quality. I think that's really not acceptable. That needs to be taken to the highest level ever, because then if a company actually decides to comply with ISO, then
oops.
Can you hear me now?
We can, but we couldn't hear before. Oh,
yeah, sorry, it's internet again. So I think it needs to be taken to the highest level, probably the INR, because that's the body that obviously controls the whole ISO. So they need to be reported. If they're not really compliant with the standards, then that's not really acceptable. How you do that, I think it's about, you need to be open and transparent. So for companies to recertify, they need to go through an audit. And if those auditors actually pass that certification, and that's not really independent, is it? So I think there's two steps. There's a step one, which is when you have the auditors to recertify. So that needs to be independent review of the whole ISO. And sometimes what I've seen is that companies can't be recertified until they address the issues that were identified during the audit. And then they can be recertified. But it's all about being open, and maybe they need training, maybe they're not really aware of what's happening, maybe there has been changes in the organization, etc. So the member body, INR in Algeria, needs to actually understand that, if that helps, Hamid. But it's a long discussion. Even companies worldwide, some companies don't really comply with the, they say they comply, but when you go and audit, they don't actually, which is sometimes it's just misunderstanding, sometimes it's training, it's the awareness, etc. So I think it's a matter of raising that feedback.
Okay.
I think there's a comment. There's a question from Mia. Oh, sorry, I interrupted.
No, not at all.
No. I think there was a question from Sumia about, I appreciate your engagement. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm glad you're engaged as well, especially with process approach. I love process. So would you reach me with more references about process approach, please, to clear it up more? Thanks for all, and Sahaf.com. No problem, Sumia. Perhaps we could connect outside of this meeting, and we can go through it in detail, because it's such a it's a simple subject, project, but it needs a lot of thinking and strategy. So I'm happy to connect with you separately through IERS. If you could email us on the details on the screen, and then we can have a discussion around that. And please, Dr. Zeribi, step in if you think there is additional information related to Algeria for the questions I've answered.
بارك الله فيك. كفيتي ووفيتي دكتورة. يبدو لي بزايد عليها أسئلة وأجوبة. الأسئلة اللي بقات تبان لي نرجعوها لهم بار إيميل، برك نجاوبوهم بار إيميل خير.
إن شاء الله.
Yeah.
ما نشوفش مازالوا أسئلة.
I can't see anything from my screen, so.
Okay. Shall we close?
Sounds good to me, yeah.
Okay. Barakallahu fikum. Thank you for coming to the webinar. We hope that you go away with something that is interesting, and we also hope that you keep in touch with us, whether it be through email, through the Facebook webpage, or also the group. There are two on Facebook. There's a page and a group, and give us your thoughts, suggestions, ideas, or just say, give us a thumbs up, say, hey, that was good, or it was rubbish, we're not coming back. Hopefully it's not the second one. وإن شاء الله رمضان كريم وصحة فطوركم. باش ما بقى عليكم شوية بورق خليوه لنا كي نجيو ناكلو.
صحة فطوركم everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for listening to me, for sure.
شكرا جزيلا وصحة فطوركم إن شاء الله.
شكرا. Thank you. إن شاء الله.